We live in a world that feels increasingly invisible. Data flows through the cloud. Cars run on electricity. Entire cities are powered by wind and sun. And artificial intelligence needs more than some code and a few servers. But here's the reality no one is talking about. The cloud isn't in the sky. It's underground. It weighs millions of tons, and it's made of a reddish-brown metal that humanity has depended on for over 10,000 years. Copper. Every single data point sent to the cloud travels through copper cables at some point. Every single electric vehicle rolling silently down the road contains 4 times more copper than the car it replaces. And every solar panel and wind turbine that we're building to save our climate, strongly dependent on copper. But here's the problem. The world is about to need more copper than it ever has before. And there isn't enough. In fact, the deficit is already here. Copper isn't new. It's arguably the oldest industrial material on Earth. Around 10,000 years ago, humans discovered that this soft, reddish metal could be shaped into tools and weapons. It was so transformative that we literally named an entire age after the alloy it created. Fast forward a few thousand years. In the 1830s, when Samuel Morse needed a material to carry electrical signals across the United States, he didn't choose gold. He didn't choose silver. He chose copper. The telegraph, the Victorian internet, ran on it. Then came electrification. When Edison and Westinghouse wired the modern world in the late 1800s, copper became the nervous system of civilization itself. Every power plant, every transmission line, every wall in every building, copper. And then the internet. The very network you're watching this video on was built, physically, literally, on copper infrastructure. Here's the pattern. Every single technological revolution in human history has demanded more copper than the one before it. And the revolution happening right now? It's not just demanding more, it's demanding more than all of them combined. Let's start with the one everyone's talking about: artificial intelligence. When you ask an AI model a question, it feels effortless, instant, like the answer just appears out of thin air. But behind that answer is a data center the size of a small city. Thousands of servers running at full capacity, consuming enormous amounts of electricity, and generating enormous amounts of heat. A traditional data center already uses significant amounts of copper in its power systems, its cooling infrastructure, its cabling. But an AI-optimized data center? It's a completely different beast. AI chips like NVIDIA's GPU consume roughly 3 times the power of traditional server processors. That means 3 times the electrical infrastructure to deliver that power and significantly more cooling capacity to remove the heat. All of it wired with copper. And here's what makes this truly unprecedented. We're not talking about a gradual build-out. Right now, in 2025 and 2026, hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta are spending hundreds of billions of dollars building out AI infrastructure simultaneously. The International Energy Agency estimates that global data center electricity demand could more than double by 2030. Every single megawatt of that new capacity requires copper to generate the power, to transmit the power, to distribute the power inside the facility, to cool the servers, even the cables connecting the servers to each other. And this is just the first demand driver. But data centers, as massive as they are actually just the beginning. Because the thing that's really eating copper, it's already rolling down the streets of every major city on Earth. A traditional gasoline car contains about 20 kilograms of copper. Wiring, alternator, starter motor. It adds up. Now look at an electric vehicle. Roughly 80 kilograms. 4 times as much. And it doesn't stop at the car itself. Every EV needs a place to charge. A single public fast charging station requires another several hundred kilograms of copper in transformers, cabling, and grid connections. Now scale that up. The world produced roughly 90 million cars last year. If even half of those become electric within the next decade, which is what current government mandates are targeting, we're talking about millions of tons of additional copper demand that simply didn't exist 15 years ago. But here's what most people miss. The cars themselves are actually just the tip of the iceberg, because there's something much, much bigger that needs to happen before any of this works. And almost no one is talking about it. Here's the question nobody is asking. Where does all this electricity actually come from? And how does it get to where it's needed? The electric grid, the physical network of cables, transformers, and substations that delivers power from where it's generated to where it's consumed, is the single largest copper-consuming infrastructure on the planet. And right now, most of the developed world is running on a grid that was designed and built decades ago, for a completely different era. That grid was built to carry power in one direction, from large centralized fossil fuel plants to homes and businesses. It was never designed for what we're now asking it to do. Renewables are distributed. They're intermittent. Solar generates during the day. Wind generates when it blows, often hundreds of miles from the cities that need the power. To make a renewable energy system actually work, you need to fundamentally rebuild the grid. New long-distance transmission lines, new local distribution networks, new substations, new transformers, new interconnectors between countries. The International Energy Agency has estimated that the world needs to build or upgrade roughly 80 million kilometers of power lines by 2040. That is the equivalent of the entire existing global grid, rebuilt from scratch. And every single kilometer of it requires copper. This is the demand driver that dwarfs everything else. Not because it's more exciting than AI or electric cars, but because it's the invisible foundation that all of them depend on. Without the grid, the data centers don't run. The EVs don't charge. The wind farms and solar panels generate power that has nowhere to go. So this is the picture. AI, electrification, and the energy transition aren't 3 separate trends. They are 3 forces pulling on the exact same resource at the exact same time at a scale the copper market has never seen before. And that raises an obvious question. If the world needs this much copper, why don't we just dig up more? It sounds simple, doesn't it? The world needs more copper, so just open more mines. Dig faster, go deeper. But the copper industry has a problem that no amount of money can solve quickly. And it starts with the rock itself. When you mine copper, you're not pulling pure metal out of the ground. You're extracting enormous quantities of rock that contain tiny amounts of copper mineral. The percentage of copper in that rock is called the ore grade, and it's the single most important number in the entire industry. In 1900, the average copper mine was processing ore with a grade of around 3 to 4%. That means for every 100 tons of rock, you got 3 to 4 tons of copper. By the year 2000, that number had fallen to roughly 1%. Today, many of the world's largest mines are operating at ore grades below 0.5%. Let that sink in. To produce the same amount of copper today, you need to move 6 to 8 times more rock than you did a century ago. That means more trucks, more fuel, more water, more energy, more waste rock that needs to be stored somewhere, more environmental impact, and critically, more cost. And this isn't a temporary dip. The easy copper, the high-grade deposits near the surface, has largely been found and extracted. What's left is deeper, lower grade, and harder to reach. The mining industry likes to say that the age of easy copper is over. The geological reality is even blunter than that. The best copper on the planet has already been dug up. But even if someone discovered a world-class high-grade deposit tomorrow morning, the kind of deposit geologists dream about, there is an entirely different problem standing in the way. Let's say you're a mining company. Your exploration team has just found a massive copper deposit. High-grade, economically viable. How long before that deposit produces its first ton of copper? First, you need to conduct a full geological survey, core drilling, resource estimation, feasibility studies. That takes 2 to 3 years. Then comes the permitting process, environmental impact assessments, community consultations, water rights negotiations, land access agreements, government approvals from multiple agencies at the local, regional, and national level. In Chile, the world's largest copper producer, the average permitting timeline has stretched to over 5 years. In the United States, it can take 7 to 10 years just to get the permits, before a single shovel even breaks ground. Then, you actually have to build the mine. Infrastructure, processing facilities, roads, power supply. Another 3 to 5 years of construction. Total timeline from discovery to first production, 10 to 15 years, on a good day. And here's the crucial point. The massive demand surge we just talked about, AI EVs the grid, that's happening right now. The mines that would be needed to meet that demand should have been approved and started a decade ago. They weren't. We are heading into a period where physical copper supply simply cannot keep up with physical copper demand. But even if we miraculously opened all those mines tomorrow, we run into a much darker problem. We don't actually control the copper. South America is the heartland of global copper mining. Chile and Peru produce more than a third of all the copper on Earth. But mining is only the first step. Raw copper ore needs to be refined, smelted and processed into the pure copper that industry actually uses. And this is where the map shifts dramatically. China. China controls roughly half of the world's copper smelting and refining capacity. This means that even countries with abundant copper mines are dependent on Chinese refining infrastructure to turn that copper into something usable. And it gets worse. In recent years, Chinese mining companies have been aggressively acquiring stakes in copper projects across Africa, particularly in the Congo and Zambia, effectively locking up future supply before it even comes out of the ground. This isn't just market dominance, it's strategic positioning. We've seen this playbook before. A concentration of critical processing capacity in a single country creates a strategic choke point. So the picture isn't just that there isn't enough copper being mined. It's that the copper that is being mined is flowing through a supply chain that is increasingly concentrated and vulnerable to disruption. The world's most critical industrial metal has a supply chain that looks less like a market and more like a chessboard. Now, if you've been paying attention, there's a question forming in your mind right about now. And it's a fair one. Can't we just use something else? Aluminum is the most common alternative. It's lighter, it's cheaper, and it's far more abundant. And yes, In some applications, aluminum can replace copper. Overhead power lines, for example. Some types of wiring in buildings. Certain heat exchangers. But here's the problem. Copper conducts electricity roughly 60% better than aluminum. That means aluminum wires need to be significantly thicker to carry the same current. In applications where space is tight, inside an EV motor, inside a data center rack, inside a wind turbine nacelle, that trade-off simply doesn't work. And for the highest performance applications, electric motor windings, transformers, high-frequency data transmission, there is currently no viable substitute at scale. Copper's combination of conductivity, flexibility, corrosion resistance, and reliability is, for now, unmatched. What about recycling? Copper is actually one of the most recycled metals on Earth, and recycled copper is essentially identical to freshly mined copper in quality. That's a genuine advantage. But here's the math. Recycled copper currently accounts for roughly 30 to 35% of total supply. Even if we pushed recycling rates to their theoretical maximum, it would cover only a fraction of the demand growth we've just described. You can't recycle copper that's already embedded in buildings, in cables, in infrastructure that's still in use. And you certainly can't recycle copper that hasn't been mined yet. So the answer is no. Not because alternatives and recycling are useless, they're not. They'll play a role, but they cannot close the gap. Not at the scale we're talking about, and not in the time frame the world needs. Which brings us to the question that the smartest investors in the world are already asking. In May 2024, the world's largest mining company made a move that most people completely ignored. BHP, a $200 billion mining giant, launched a takeover bid for Anglo-American. The deal was valued at nearly $50 billion. It would have been one of the largest mining acquisitions in history. The deal ultimately fell apart. Anglo-American rejected the offer, but that's not the point. The point is why BHP wanted it in the first place. It wasn't about iron ore. It wasn't about diamonds. It was about copper. Anglo-American controls some of the world's most significant undeveloped copper resources. BHP was willing to pay a historic premium to lock them up. And BHP isn't alone. Across the industry, the world's largest miners, sovereign wealth funds, and strategic investors are quietly repositioning. They're acquiring copper assets, investing in exploration, and locking up future supply. Because they've done the math. The same math we just walked through in this video. While retail investors chase the latest AI stock, the biggest players in the global economy are betting on something far more fundamental. They're betting that the technology revolution everyone is so excited about has a physical bottleneck, and that bottleneck is copper. So how do investors typically get exposure to copper? There are broadly three routes. The first is mining companies. These are the companies that actually extract copper from the ground. Names like Freeport-McMoRan, Southern Copper, and Ivanhoe Mines. When copper prices rise, mining company revenues and margins tend to expand. But they also carry operational risk. Individual mines can face disruptions, cost overruns, political challenges, or geological disappointments. The second is ETFs, exchange-traded funds that track the price of copper itself, or baskets of copper mining stocks. These offer broader exposure without betting on a single company, but they come with tracking costs and won't perfectly mirror the spot price of the metal. And the third is futures contracts, direct bets on the future price of copper, traded on exchanges like the London Metal Exchange or COMEX. This is how institutional traders and hedge funds play the copper market. But futures are complex instruments with leverage, margin requirements, and rollover costs that can work against you. Each route carries its own risk profile. None of them is a simple bet. Every single one of these investment pathways is built on the exact same thesis: that the world is entering an era of structural copper scarcity. Not because we've run out of copper in the ground, but because we cannot get it out of the ground fast enough to keep up with the most disruptive technological shift in a generation. The cloud isn't in the sky. It never was. And the invisible metal holding it all together. The world is finally starting to pay attention. But while governments and tech billionaires are fighting over the metal that powers our future, a completely different crisis is brewing in the commodities we actually consume every single day. If you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Bye-bye. Until next time.